When you are judging a team's strength of schedule and you look at where their opponents were ranked, do you judge them where they were ranked when you played them or where they are ranked currently? This is a great question. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of college football. This is why I believe this is the role Vegas should play in college football strength of scheduling. It's just that. That's where they should be involved, strength of schedule. You got some people who would argue, Las Vegas should be involved in the college football playoff selection process. And I agree, but then they say, yeah, for instance, your record against the spread should be taken into account. No, it shouldn't. That's foolishness. That's an arbitrary metric that has nothing to do with you on the field because it's not apples to apples. More is expected of Ohio State than is expected of Wisconsin. Maybe not by much, but that's the way it is. Bruce Hornsby reference. And so if Ohio State is 2-5 against the spread and Wisconsin's 5-2, that automatically means Wisconsin's a better team. So get that out of here. But what I mean is when I say Vegas should be involved, it's when we get to the end of the year. This is why I cannot watch the playoff show that ESPN does. I can't watch it because I have to listen to playoff committee members and then folks on a panel in some cases that don't know any better tell me about how many ranked wins a team has. How many wins against top 20 or top 25 teams does this team have? And it's why I look like I do. I pulled my hair out. I'm not in the process of doing it. It's past tense. It's already been done. I've pulled my hair out listening to that because I don't believe in it. I don't believe that's the proper way to gauge the strength of a team's schedule. I'm going to give you two examples from this past year, and I want you to think along with me. Where were you, for example, in week 2? Arkansas played Texas in week 2. Texas came into Reynolds Razorback Stadium, and the entire stadium was on fire. It was an electric atmosphere. Texas was undefeated, obviously. They had just beat Louisiana, remember? Convincingly in week 1. That was a game everyone had Texas on upset alert for. Texas wins. Texas is highly ranked, and they're highly rated, and this is an important word. Those aren't the same. Ranking and rating are not the same. So Texas goes in there. Arkansas thumped them. And remember how you felt that night. I want you to vividly think back. Remember how you felt that night when you watched Arkansas just thump Texas. You thought to yourself, rightfully so, that's a high caliber win. That's a quality win. And you were right. Here's the mistake a lot of people made. They didn't freeze that opinion. This is my opinion. You ought to freeze that opinion and then set it on a countertop somewhere. Don't touch it. Because what happens is you get later in the year and then external factors and circumstances that happen after you played Arkansas happen to Texas. And they start losing more games and a bunch of injuries probably pop up, as is often the case. And all of a sudden they end up a beaten up team that has several losses down the road. And people look back on Arkansas's resume and they say, turns out that win wasn't what we thought it was. Yes, it was. You allowed yourself to get fooled. Because the fact of the matter is, the Texas that Kansas faced is not the same Texas that Arkansas faced. Emotionally and physically, they're not the same team anymore. Another famous example, before we go to the third one or the other one from this past year, is back a couple of years ago, I think 2017. I remember I went to the opener in Atlanta, and it was Alabama, Florida State, both top 4 teams, I think. It was like number 2 versus number 4 or something like that. And Bama beats Florida State, and they knocked DeAndre Francois out of the game, out for the season, and it ended up that Florida State's season went off the rails, and I will never forget, this is when this opinion was born in my mind. When I started watching towards the end of the year, because remember, that was the year Bama, they didn't win the SEC, but they still made the playoff, but a lot of people were arguing they shouldn't make the playoff. They don't have any quality wins, or they don't have any top 10 ranked wins. They did. They beat Florida State. That was a top 10 win. But then some folks over in this corner said, look, Florida State's not even ranked. Well, I know they're not ranked, but that only matters to me if Bama played them last week. They didn't. They played them full strength, hair on fire, all the goals in front of them in week 1. You think maybe Bama got a little bit stronger pushback from Florida State than Florida got from them 13 or 14 weeks later? I think so. Without their quarterback? I think so. Jimbo Fisher on his way out the door? Yeah, I think so. So I remember that, and I said to myself, well, how do we resolve this? The way we resolve it is we take Vegas and we bring them in the room. And how we do this is we ask Las Vegas, put a power rating on these teams that are about to play on this field on this given day. So let's go to Alabama, Florida from this past year, for example. Bama goes to Florida. It was week 3. And they go down there and they got past Florida 31-29. It was one of the great atmospheres this season. I hated I couldn't be there. There was only one place we could be on a given Saturday. And I remember some of the Bama players were talking about how incredible the atmosphere is, how inspired the performance from Florida was. They had just played in the SEC title game a year before. And so that day, what I would love to do in my world is I would love to have a Vegas odds maker, people who are responsible for getting it right with their jobs on the line, tell me how good is Florida that day? How good is Alabama that day? When they play, how good are they? Define that, then have the game play out, and then grade those teams and define the caliber and quality of that win, and then freeze it. And nothing that happens down the road when Dan Mullen's on the hot seat and players start opting out, players get hurt, and you're not the team you were earlier in the year, nothing about that can devalue the win you had against Florida from 2 months prior, because that's stupid. And so that's how I define it. I like to freeze the value of a win in the present moment, and then I don't like to go back and touch it. There's one exception to this rule, and the exception is if it is so blatantly obvious a team was a poser, then maybe I will manually override. And that's a very rare exception. But there's another thing that could happen. It could be that in retrospect we look back and we say, we didn't know the team you beat in week 2 was as good as they were. Now I'm fine with that. I'm fine with upgrading the caliber of the win you had. Or let's say you get beat by a team and they weren't ranked at the time, but all of a sudden they've gone on to be a top 10 team. Well, all of a sudden that loss doesn't look that bad. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because the external factors don't impact you and make you better. They could only knock you down and make you worse after I played you. So I can go back and retroactively add value to a win. I'm not about devaluing stuff, only on the rarest of occasions. So to answer the question, I determine the value based on what you were at the time. But it's not just what you were ranked. It's what you were rated. How would I power rate you at the time? That's how I decide that. Long-winded way of saying I'm not happy with the way the conversation currently happens in that avenue.